Hi there, my name's Don Tipping, and I've been a farmer and a homesteader for close to 30 years now. And recently I went with some friends to see the new movie in the theaters called Homestead by Angel Studios, and I wanted to share a bit of a reaction piece, not so much a review of the movie, but as a qualified impression after many decades of growing a lot of my own food for myself and my family, and also producing enough surplus to be able to sell at farmers markets. And we have a organic seed company here on site where we produce seed of over 700 varieties of vegetables, flowers, herbs, and small grains. So a quick overview, there's plenty of trailers and that kind of thing that you can check out, and reviews and that type of thing. And we'll be releasing another one that is a conversation between my friends and I. And my one friend is a longtime homesteader like myself, and the other is newer to homesteading but has a background as a Navy SEAL. So he has a lot to say about the security element of that. I'll leave that for that one, but I'll link it once we get it up to this video. So just a quick overview in case you're curious about what I have to say but aren't going to see the movie. It sets up a fictional scenario wherein there's a terrorist attack upon the LA area of a nuclear bomb goes off. And then later you realize that Texas and the entire East Coast has been attacked as well, and cellular communications are down, and general societal breakdown and collapse is occurring. So the main set of the movie is this very well fortified, what I like to call a billionaire bunker, for those of us in the permaculture community, in the Rockies. We presume Colorado, but I don't think they ever really say. So to set the stage, what's interesting, so I'm going to list 7 things that I feel like were glaring misses or unrealistic portrayals if such a scenario were to occur, even just in that one site, but then extrapolate that out across the country, and you can imagine. And this is something, as a farmer living rurally, a lot of us, we think about this because we have to deal with these kind of things on the regular. Like last night, we had a thunder and lightning and windstorm, and the power was out. So we have grid-tied battery backup solar and micro hydro, so we don't even notice when the power goes out, but I see it on the internet, everybody's freaking out. And things like trees falling down across the road, you've got to get out there with a truck or a tractor and chainsaw and just take care of it. So I think rural people are much more prepared to take care of business on their own. So for one, you got to imagine that, it portrays, my first point, an unrealistic scenario in which you have this billionaire bunker where there's I'll say 10 to 12,000 square foot mansion on a hill. And I think they overly focus on that home, and there's lots of drone footage and just how beautiful it is. And yet a home that large would have 8 to 10 bedrooms. And in the movie, they really only show 2 families sharing it, while there's a tent village outside of like canvas wall tents and I think maybe a bell tent or 2. And it's happening in the fall. And you can tell because like in the drone shots in the movie, there's the nice leaf color, and there's grapes on the vine and apples. So from my experience in that ecology, I would say it's mid-September. So for one, most people won't have a 10,000 square foot home. And for one, how do you heat it? That would take a lot of firewood, and it takes a lot of electricity to power something that large, all the infrastructure requirements. So for one, I think that was a big miss to have it focus on the opulence of this well-to-do family that has been preparing. So the second point, at which I feel like this was a huge failing, and I wish they would consult people like me or someone who's more knowledgeable about all this, because there's an overemphasis upon their armory. There's basically a huge vault with kind of a bank style door filled with hundreds of rifles, semi automatic weapons, shotguns, ammo, who knows what, all kind of stuff like that. And their food storage seems minimal, like maybe an oversized pantry with some of those metal shelves you could get at Home Depot or Lowe's or something. And they're not even stocked that well, but they keep focusing on the main protagonist on this chalkboard, keeping track of how much they have, how many calories for each person. And they're trying to feed about 80 plus people, if I recall correctly. That's a lot of food. And I think they should have focused more on the infrastructure they had for food storage, whether it's like a walk-in cooler. Here on my farm, we have 3 walk-in coolers, 2 for seeds and 1 for produce and meat. We have multiple chest freezers and a Pelton wheelhouse that also could be like bear-proof food storage and that kind of thing. And at one point, they show one of the protagonists drive his Jeep to where they store grain. So you can tell it's not walking distance from the house, and then he's frustrated because rats have gotten into it. But meanwhile, their guns and ammo is like in the house in this vault. And which begs the question of what do you need the guns for unless you're protecting your food? So why would you put your food out here in basically like a shack? And I just feel like they should have done a better job portraying that, and perhaps it will come up. I'm not going to leave any spoilers in this movie review or reaction piece, but it is a series, and that is widely available. So the movie is first, and then so far they've released 2 episodes of the series, so perhaps they get into that further. But you got to have the infrastructure for storage, and also things like screw top 55-gallon barrels are really good rodent-proof storage containers, 5-gallon buckets with screw top lids, all that basic stuff that I know here on my farm. We have probably a couple hundred Rubbermaid tubs. We have metal cans, barrels, extras of all this stuff. My main seed room is a double insulated and wrapped with hardware cloth to keep rats out, because we have millions of dollars worth of seeds in there because we're a bioregional seed bank. So that just for me had me pulling my hair out as I was watching the thing. So the third thing, they depict minimal gardens. It's all these like very romanticized, idealized shots with a perfect light angle, harvesting the grapes, eating an apple, something like that. Sure, in September you're going to have abundance. That's the most abundant time of year in a homestead garden in the northern latitudes here in the U.S. However, they never show like long rows of vegetables or grains or root vegetables, that kind of thing. They show a couple smallish greenhouses with some LED lights. They do have like an indoor growing thing, but the one scene, which is kind of like a romantic love scene, they show all these marigolds flowering, and I just feel like they needed some people with true gardening experience to have consulted on it, because as a lifetime gardener, homesteader, I was just frustrated. I'll leave it at that. It was so unrealistic. And they never really mentioned seeds. They mentioned seed potatoes at one thing, like that they're all rotting. But as we know, you're going to lose a little bit. But if you have good storage, back to the food storage, then you've already calculated that. Any prepper would know, like, okay, you're going to lose some of your potatoes, but they never talk about vegetable seeds, grain seeds. They never show where they're going to grow this and that kind of thing. So huge missed opportunity to use this movie as an educational piece, because if you're talking homestead, a homestead to me means that you're growing your food first and foremost, and I'll get to more later. The fourth thing, speaking of food, this is kind of related to that, is a lack of livestock. They show some chickens and some eggs, but if you've got 80 people, you're going through, people eat an egg or 2 a day. That's a lot of chickens. They don't show that at all. There's no goats, sheep, cows, horses, and that's huge. In a collapse scenario when perhaps electricity is limited and even maybe your chest freezers, you might not have the power to support that. Livestock is meat on the hoof, and anyone who has really homesteaded knows this. And I've kept a flock of sheep for 25 years now, and goats as well. We've raised pigs and turkeys and geese and all that stuff. And all that stuff requires infrastructure. It requires hay. It requires manure handling abilities. Lots of tools. Here on my farm, I probably have 10 wheelbarrows and garden carts, and then there's things that hook up to tractors or ATVs or riding lawnmowers for moving things around, and they don't show that at all. It's way too much emphasis on all the military security kitted out. They've got, all the stuff for doing basically laser tag stuff, but they don't show livestock. That's like homestead equals livestock. And if you don't have livestock, you just have a garden. I'm sorry. That's just the truth. So, also, on the livestock thing, they don't really depict dogs and cats. And how are you going to control rodents and birds if you don't have cats and if you don't have dogs? And also, with all the security stuff, dogs are pretty awesome at notifying you of intruders, strangers, threats. We've got livestock guardian dogs here, and if you're out at the edge of the wilderness, which is kind of what they depict, that's just another huge missed opportunity. So the fifth thing, and this is a bit of return to it, but it's really important, especially for people that aren't familiar with the boots on the ground reality. So idealized fall abundance. And fall is your most abundant time. You're going into winter. That's when your food storage needs to be highest. Your ability to can, freeze, dry, preserve, root cellar, the fall abundance. And they really were not showing that. I would have loved to have seen crates of apples going into a root cellar, potatoes being dug and stored in another root cellar, because you don't actually want to store them in the same one, because fruit gives off ethylene gas, which is going to make the potatoes sprout. And this is old homestead wisdom. Nothing new here. So enough on that, but going through winter, and the reality is on a homestead, the time of least abundance is the spring, late spring, because you've gone through your root cellar, your stored foods are running out, and it takes time to grow things. Whereas in the movie they depict that they can just grow potatoes through the winter in a greenhouse heated by a wood stove with LED lights. And that's unrealistic. That's going to fail. I'm sorry. If that's your plan, that's going to fail. It's about your storage and planning out the seasonality of it all. And for one, I would not want to be trying to dig my heels in the Rocky Mountains, where you might have many feet of snow, and then all of that becomes much more difficult. And so that leads me into my sixth point, which is firewood. I mean, come on. Going into winter, you got to have some serious wood sheds if you're going to be using cook stoves, most of which are fairly inefficient, and you burn through wood really quickly because they're not as sealed as a modern stove. And in the movie, there's like this giant mansion, of which there's like 6 people staying in that, maybe a few more, what they show you. But everybody's in this like tent village of these wall tents, and going into winter, I mean, come on, you're not like, that's not going to work. So everybody's going to pile in there, and the kindling, wood handling, back to your wheelbarrows, your carts, or the ability of moving firewood around. And firewood is the original solar power, so if you're cooking and heating with wood, wood for light, the glass door is really helpful. They depict a lot of candles. And unrealistically, there's one scene, there's like one character, and she's got like a dozen of these big candles going. And for one, air quality aside, it's not realistic. You should store candles for sure. Don't get me wrong. But a good wood stove with the glass door, it casts a lot of light. If you don't have the solar and battery backup for electric lights, then firewood. And the sheds to handle it, all the tools, how many axes, mauls, splitting wedges, all that kind of stuff. Also, on that note, they don't depict fuel storage. And yet they show people driving around and things. And I know here on my farm, we've got a 700-gallon diesel tank and a 500-gallon gasoline tank. And when I think about a collapse scenario, the two things that come to mind that would be really hard to get by without are my tractor for soil preparation, for tillage, because we don't have draft animals. So diesel would get prioritized for that, and then gasoline for chainsaws and maybe your log splitter. Those things are crucial, and even the Amish sects allow for the use of chainsaws, but have some good crosscut saws on hand, and they don't show that for backup, just in case, because chainsaws and stuff can break. So the seventh point is just back to infrastructure. A really good, I've been on this homestead for 25 years now, and we probably have 20 buildings, and I have about 3 in mind I want to build. 2 of them are wood sheds. The other is a metal shop. I have a nice wood shop. So they don't show that wood shop. You got to be able to repair your tools, fabricate things, make what you need to survive. Back to the walk-in coolers, also barns. And that they had all these people in tents. If you've got livestock, then you have barns, then you have dry storage for hay and all of that kind of thing. So and there's a lot of this out there on the internet, and that's why I felt compelled to make this reaction piece, is these very romanticized pieces about, like all these people ask me, hey, have you seen The Biggest Little Farm? And I'm like, God, that's, the exact depiction of how do you make $1 million farming. Well, you start with 2, and then in that movie, I should do a whole reaction piece on that one too. It's just totally idealized, and they're failing with all the money and resources in the world. So again, back to this homestead thing, if they have the money for a giant mansion on a hill, then they should have set up all this other infrastructure that's actually what you need to not just survive but thrive. And that's where I want to get back in closing. I don't really consider myself a prepper. I'm more a homesteader farmer because I'm following my own spiritual guidance of what to do in life, how to do life, and what's important, which is, family, community, faith, water, seeds, wildlands, food, abundance, this kind of thing, charity. And rather than reacting to what if. And that way, if you get used to living life this way, then the speed bump you encounter when we inevitably experience disruptions to supply chains, you are less affected by it all. So I do want to also close, and really how I was most touched by this movie is that they centered it on faith and a spiritual connection to Creator, to God. And I think that will see us through the hardest times, and also the feminine wisdom to return to our connection to God. So I do want to, give them a big shout out to that. I really appreciate that. And I know when my friends and I saw that, we were all touched by that rather than just the pure logistical concerns. So hopefully you got something out of that. Check out the rest of the videos here on my channel and our podcast. And if you need seeds, we can definitely set you up with super high quality, bioregionally adapted, certified organic seeds, because that's super important. All right, peace to you and your families.